I'm having studied this for over 25 years. I am absolutely convinced, based on evidence, that you, me, every single person seeing this video, yes, all of us are indeed going to have life after death. We are literally eternal beings having a physical earthly life. This is temporary. Our real existence is going to be in the afterlife, and a wonderful afterlife, I might describe too. We're all going to have those supernormal senses. Our consciousness will be accelerated, as is almost uniformly described in near-death experiences when they describe the afterlife. And so that's the ability of every person on this planet, of all walks of life, to look forward to that wonderful afterlife is literally, in my opinion, perhaps the most profoundly positive message for all of humanity that is even possible. Many, many years ago, I interviewed a lady named Vicky. Vicky was born totally blind. To her, vision was unknown and unknowable. And yet, Vicky had a near-death experience. Here's the rest of the story. She was blind, but very gifted with her ability to sing. So she was singing at a bar, and at the end of her performance, a patron was driving her home. Unfortunately, this patron was very drunk. So they had a very bad car accident. And the first time Vicky had vision, the first time she saw herself, her consciousness was up over her body. And from that vantage point, she saw on the gurney down below in the emergency room a body. Initially, she was horrified because this vision was so unfamiliar to her. But after she calmed down, she correlated the feel of her hair, long hair, and interestingly, a ring that her father had given her. And only at that time, she suddenly realized that was her down below, and she was having vision, and this was unknown to her. So she went through and had many of the classical types of characteristics of near-death experiences, traveled through a tunnel, entered a beautiful unearthly realm. But notably, Vicky had what many near-death experiencers describe, and that's 360-degree vision. In other words, she could simultaneously see in front of her, back of her, above her, below her, right, left. Technically, it's spherical vision. And she had a very detailed near death experience that was highly visual, even though she'd been born totally blind. So when as I was interviewing her, I told her, well, gee, those of us, the rest of us on Earth, have what's called pie-shaped visual fields because of the location of our eyes in the skull and the head that we have. And Vicky literally laughed at me because from her entire life experience, vision was spherical. Why should it be limited by a pie-shaped visual field? So Vicky is an excellent example, and we actually have a series now of people that were either severely visually impaired or legally blind that had a near-death experience that, like Vicky, had highly visual near-death experiences, and most of them, like Vicky, had actually supernormal vision, seeing vision better than we do in our earthly everyday life, which is absolutely amazing. One of the major lines of evidence right there for the reality of near-death experience.
So Vicky was blind one more time, right?
Yeah, she was
Oh,
born totally blind. She
okay.
until her near-death experience, she had no experience with vision. By the way, I tried to explain vision in terms of the remaining four physical bodily senses. No way. You cannot explain vision to anybody born totally blind in terms of the remaining four physical senses.
Okay, so as a doctor, how do you explain that? How she sees the
Mhm.
world 360 degrees?
Mhm. Oh, that she had her. Don't forget, at the beginning, her consciousness was apart from her body. Her
Yeah.
consciousness was up above her physical body, laying down on the gurney down in the emergency room. So, this was, if you will, people have called it consciousness apart from the body, the soul, if you will. Basically, all that she was and her conscious awareness, as so many near-death experiencers describe, is apart from their physical body, typically rising above their physical body, often early in near death experiences. I mean, I've literally heard thousands of near death experiences describe this. So Vicky was absolutely not possibly seeing with her physical eyes. That's impossible. That's medically absolutely impossible. But what she was seeing is what many near death experiencers describe, vision with their consciousness apart from the body. So, again, proving that that can happen, And almost certainly, I believe firmly, based on a mountain of evidence, that that is the initial step that people will have as after permanent irreversible death as part of the entry into an afterlife.
All right, I read messages for my videos about NDE, and a lot of people say, not a lot, but there is comments saying that, oh, that's just hallucinations induced by the condition. How do you explain that?
To say that Vicky, born totally blind, that had vision and was able to visually see the ring her father gave her, her hair, and basically it was evidential. What she saw really happened when when she talked about it later. Coupled with literally several thousand people that have had near-death experiences that have that initial consciousness apart from the body, with observations of earthly events. In my research, I found over 98% of the time what they see or hear is absolutely accurate down to the finest details, even if their consciousness during their near death experience is geographically far from their physical body. I mean, hundreds of yards, even over a mile. Every single time, or virtually every time, that a person has a near death experience and their consciousness is apart from their body, when they check it out later and verify it with going back to the scene or talking to other people, what they saw accurate down to the finest details. That's not a hallucination. Okay, I'm a doctor. Hallucinations are, and I see that they're unreal. They are more often frightening. They Events can skip around like dreams. They clearly, when you have a hallucination, it's nothing like reality. I mean, it's literally a non-reality. Whereas near-death experiences are simply a gripping, remarkable extension of reality, of observation of this real world when they have out-of-body experiences.
Okay, so for our reviewers, so we should be assured that there is life after death. This is
Mhm.
not the end.
Yeah. I'm having studied this for 25 years. I am absolutely convinced, based on evidence, that you, me, every single person seeing this video, yes, all of us are indeed going to have life after death. We are literally eternal beings having a physical earthly life. This is temporary. Our real existence is going to be in the afterlife, and a wonderful afterlife, I might describe too. We're all going to have those supernormal senses. Our consciousness will be accelerated, as is almost uniformly described in near death experiences when they describe the afterlife. And so that's the ability of every person on this planet, of all walks of life, to look forward to that wonderful afterlife is literally, in my opinion, perhaps the most profoundly positive message for all of humanity that is even possible.
So, Dr. Long, what is the most common vision the near-death experiencers see? Some describe a tunnel, some
Mhm.
describe some kind of figure like an angel, some say Jesus. What is
Mhm.
the most common in your own experience?
Sure. Near death experiences, especially the detailed ones, are profoundly detailed. In other words, what they see, what they hear, what they're feeling is extensive over what in earth terms would be a long period of time. So one of the more common things is, again, that out of body observation. About 45% of people having a near death experience will see ongoing earthly events. About 55% don't. As you said, that's right. Following the separation of consciousness, it's fairly common that they pass into or through a tunnel, variably described, but essentially never claustrophobic. They often see at the end of the tunnel or as part of their near death experience a beautiful, very unearthly, if you will, mystical light. Sometimes it can be very bright. Many near death experiencers will say it was bright, like a thousand times as bright as the sun, but essentially never hurts their visual awareness, or technically they don't have eyes at that point because their consciousness. A fairly common thing they see are deceased loved ones. These are joyous interactions they share, they can communicate, and these are really just really neat parts of a near death experience. And it's not just humans, not just their prior human loved ones. We have a large series of people that encounter deceased pets. And again, joyous reunions, even if the pet or the human died at a very advanced age of a disfiguring accident or illness, they're essentially always picture perfect health in the afterlife. And so that's really inspiring. They can then see that unearthly, often called heavenly realm. And again, while that's variably described, common themes are beauty, beautiful, like commonly stated flowers, but with colors that are so beautiful that they have no correlate on earth. They may be hearing music, again, beautiful beyond anything on earth. There can be landscapes, buildings, again, far more beautiful or glorious, if you will, than anything on earth. There may be other beings with them that they encounter. And yes, about 5 to 7% of near-death experiences describe an encounter with Jesus. About double that percentage encounter what they believe to be God. They will come back and say God is an earthly word, and that doesn't begin to do justice to this overwhelming, unearthly presence of love, light, and compassion that they encountered, which is far beyond earthly descriptions, which they say any earthly word or words would be narrowing and cannot fully describe the wonder of that supreme spiritual being, or most commonly used word is God, that they encounter. So those are some of the more common things that visually they bring back from their near-death experience.
Yeah. I had one guest, actually, it was my first guest I ever recorded, a friend of mine. And I asked him this question in the interview. I said, "Did you see your loved ones?"
Mhm.
He said, "No, he didn't see anybody."
Hmm.
So I got so many comments. People are kind of angry with that. No, he didn't have any near experience. You got to see your relatives. So he didn't see anybody. And what's your take on that?
Yeah, I have to go. I have to back up your friend on that. I studied this. I ask questions. We do surveys. We do research on what people share in their near death experience. What I found, and other researchers find, that only about 20% of near death experiences describe meet encountering deceased loved ones. 80% don't. So your friend is very much in the majority of near death experiences. You absolutely do not have to encounter a deceased loved one for it to be a near death experience. There's a certain amount of detail required. There's a research scale called the NDE scale that helps distinguish a near-death experience from a non-near-death experience. But they can be. While there's some very similar characteristic elements in a near-death experience that typically occur in a consistent order, they certainly do have also significant variability in terms of what happens. And in fact, out of the over 5,000 near-death experiences I've studied, no two are identical.
Yeah, but they have a lot of similarities.
Very much so.
Yeah, with the light and
Hmm.
with the angel, sometimes a light figure appears, and the
Hmm.
voice, you gotta come back because you have some things to do.
Hmm. Oh, Sergey, you're absolutely right. Yeah, we and you raised a point earlier briefly. One of the more common words that they use to describe near-death experiences, the two most common words that we hear in analyzing the narratives of what they share, is light and love. So it's very common for people having a near-death experience to, especially when they're in these unearthly heavenly realms, to have a profound sense of love. They feel love far beyond anything that they say could be possible in their physical earthly life. They also feel a very strong connection, even unity, with everything and everyone in the afterlife, which is also a majority of near death experiencers describe. And actually, if you look up the dictionary definition of love, one of the operant describing words is a connection. So this seems to be part of the overwhelming connection that near death experiencers feel while they're in the afterlife. A very strong sense of peace. And as you said, not at all uncommon for them to describe angels. The angels are variably described. They may have names. They may not have names, but again, these are overwhelmingly loving, joyous reunions. Often there's a dialogue. Angel encounters, very beautiful part of near death experiences.
Okay, who do you think these angels are?
Mhm. They again, they can be named. They can be classic, Gabriel, some other named angels in religious texts, and others are just simply angels where they don't have a name. They often will say they seem familiar, but they don't really know. They can't recall exactly who the angel is. I want to emphasize here as we go on that we have a small series of these beings, if you will, angels, where a non-formed kind of light, loving presence occurs, and literally asks the near-death experiencer, "In what form do you want me to appear?" And the near-death experiencer can basically choose that form which would be most comforting and meaningful to them. Because understand, and this is a very important concept, especially in these unearthly heavenly realms of a near-death experience, it is absolutely not a geographically physical three-dimensional existence like we know here. It is absolutely non-physical. Time as we know it here is either radically different in near-death experiences or simply doesn't exist. And that's almost uniformly described by people having a near-death experience. Communication is essentially always telepathic by thought, but not like you would envision telepathy on Earth. I mean, it's a clear communication of ideas, uh, all context, emotion, with no possibility for confusion or error. Movement is non-physical throughout this realm, so you have to kind of readjust your thinking when you conceptualize the afterlife and near-death experiences, because it is such a radically different situation than what we know and have lived all of our life here in our physical earthly life.
Right. Also, I had comments about people, I mean, Christians,
Mhm.
who don't believe the near death experience because the person did not see Jesus.
All right. Yeah, Jesus is only in about, in my huge series, and I've looked carefully, only about 5 to 7% of near-death experiences. Jesus is alive and well and existing in the afterlife where people encounter them in near-death experiences. By the way, these are joyous encounters that people describe. Oh, by the way, people that encounter Jesus don't necessarily have to have even believed in Jesus. One of my more interesting near death experiences was someone who was a dyed in the wool atheist. They believed that there was no afterlife possible. There was not anything that could happen. You're dead, you're dead. Well, guess what? Here's how he got his mind changed. He had a near death experience. And there was, as part of a fairly detailed near death experience, Jesus appeared in a business suit. And he immediately recognized that this was Jesus and was, of course, very surprised. And then finally said, "Well, Jesus, why are you in a business suit?" And Jesus said, "Well, you wouldn't have believed me if I appeared in robes, would you?" And they went, "Ha, ha, ha." And it was funny. And they had a nice dialogue. I would emphasize he's no longer an atheist. But yeah,
Yeah.
this is people can encounter Jesus that didn't believe that was possible. Um, and the other interesting thing about encountering Jesus, or God for that matter, is that a lot of people are trained on earth that that's a very fearful encounter, that they risk judgment, that, oh my gosh, they better fall on their knees and humble themselves and quickly pay
Yeah.
atonement for all those horrible sins they've. Well, that's bunk. You just don't see that basically ever. I'm talking about, hundreds and hundreds of near-death experiences. When they encounter those loving beings, there's essentially never a sense of external judgment. The person having the near-death experience may be aware of events in their prior life, and the near-death experiencer forms that judgment, aware that it was unloving, uncaring, harmful to someone else. But as far as Jesus, God, essentially always these are joyous encounters, and there's essentially never a sense of external judgment by these beings. So, like, thank goodness.
Yeah. That's what I heard from other guests.
Mhm.
They say that the entity they met on the other side, God or Jesus or an angel, they had a great sense of humor and they spoke your language.
Yeah,
They were making cracking
absolutely.
jokes and
Yeah.
even swearing a little bit to make you relaxed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you're absolutely right, Sergey. The people, it always has impressed me, and near-death experience will emphasize it's not like, oh my gosh, this is a big formal thing. This isn't
Yeah,
like being and standing up at the front of the sanctuary at a church service and formally
yeah,
talking. No, they're close by. There's joyous interaction. There's a strong, overwhelming sense of love beyond
yeah,
anything on earth. Humor can be very good. I need to round up, Sergey, my collection of jokes and amusing things that were shared during near-death experiences. That would be a great part of a book chapter. But yeah, that
yeah,
happens
yeah,
fairly regularly, and it does help put people at ease, and it helps
yeah,
help people to understand that these beings they encounter, really do have an emotional part, and they really do care about the near-death experience, or even to putting their mind at ease with that kind of occasionally observed humor.
Yeah, I think that you don't encounter on the other side
Mhm.
someone you don't want to encounter. Here on this planet, we have to experience that we planned before coming here. We got to go through some pain, through some struggle to learn something. And this is why we have these characters in our life. They can even be your parents or your siblings who give you a really, really hard time. But when you come back to another side, lesson learned, you're not going to meet them anymore. That mother who was your mother, your father, or your sibling, that was just for the lesson. Now you're going to meet and see the real loving beings, the real close to you.
Mhm. Oh, I agree. There's no question from overwhelming near-death experience evidence that as part of us being eternal souls, eternal means no beginning and no ending, and consistent again with that huge amount of consistently observed near-death experience evidence. We as eternal souls really did have an existence before we were born, and often near-death experiencers during their, and I'll say NDE is an abbreviation, they often say there's a sense of familiarity. Those beings are familiar, like they've known them
Yeah,
for ages, and yet they can't
yeah,
put a finger on it. Well, that's still their earthly consciousness. These are undoubtedly people that they've shared a huge amount of time with their prior to Earth soul existence and will reunite with afterwards. But again, that's incredibly inspiring to me that all the loved ones that we've lost, Sergei, our fathers, our mothers, grandparents, deceased beloved pets, we're all going to be together and a joyous afterlife and in a far better environment than we are
yeah,
here in our earthly physical life. So that
yeah.
is
That's very,
one of the
that's
extremely inspiring messages of near death
exactly, yeah.
experience. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because here on the earth, we are trained, we are taught to
Hmm.
grieve, to cry. Here where I live in Eastern Europe, there are people paid persons called criers. They are hired at the funeral to cry for money, to make it more dramatic. Because
Hmm.
let's say you lost someone and you just can't cry. I mean, not everybody is a crier, but you got this a couple people who are crying their head off, make it very dramatic. It's true.
Oh, I've heard that. Yeah, that is, and and not to downplay people's grief. I
Yeah, yeah,
relatively
yeah,
recently was at a funeral with a brother-in-law who died after a very long illness, and certainly you do. It's normal. Here we are. I mean, the afterlife is wonderful for all to be together for eternity, but doggone it, our earthly life is not heaven. So we do have loss. We do have people that have been an important part of our life. They
yeah,
die. They're gone, and it's normal for people to grieve. I do too, even knowing what I know about near death experience and the certainty of an
yeah,
afterlife, a certainty of a wonderful afterlife. I still feel grief because
yeah,
that is a normal human reaction. And maybe that's one reason among many reasons we have our earthly life. In the afterlife, I'm pretty sure we won't be grieving because there won't be that loss, there won't be that separation. I think that's really something you have to have a physical, earthly existence to really know and understand, and that may be one of the myriad of reasons why we're all down here to have those types of experiences that we simply can't have when we're in that beautiful, wonderful afterlife.
yeah. I'm studying also this because I'm interviewing people, but still I'm grieving after my mother. My mother passed away 4 years ago, and she was 88 years old. She was advanced in age, but still I think she left too young because she was in bright mind and writing books until 87.
Wow.
But yeah,
Seems-
uh, but
Yeah.
still I grieve and I'm thinking and doing these interviews. I feel better because I know she's happy somewhere.
Hmm. Yeah, you'll all be all together again, and she will be free of those earthly constraints, illnesses, problems, and we'll all
Yeah.
be not only in the afterlife, not only together, but we'll have a certain freedom from our what was limiting here on earth that we will not be limited in the afterlife.
Yeah, you were mentioning those beings that are familiar. You know, interviewing near-death experiencers, they say they didn't even see the beings. They just felt the familiarity, like somebody standing behind and you know that person.
Oh, and that's absolutely true. Again, in the afterlife, in where the representations, the existence in it, near death experiences, it's not like earthly physical life. It's very often they'll have sensory awareness, they'll have a knowing that is above and beyond what we could possibly have here on earthly life. In fact, one of my key survey questions asks about their degree of consciousness and alertness during their near death experience, and about three-fourths say that they had greater consciousness and alertness in their near death experience than in the earthly everyday life. And about another 20% say it's equal. And only 5%, who probably didn't understand the question, say they had less consciousness and alertness. So it's important to note that in near death experiences, you're typically thinking at a accelerated and often hugely accelerated consciousness that's far beyond anything that you've ever been able to do on earth. Take, for example, life reviews. It's not at all unusual that people may be aware of some or even all of their prior life during the near death experience. I mean, good grief. Here they've lived decades of life on earth and they're reviewing it scene by scene, often described as like a movie theater or many, many different screens. But here are people aware of all of their prior earthly life, and yet, Sergei, they may be unconscious or clinically dead for literally minutes. So that's an excellent representation of just how enormously accelerated consciousness is often occurs during near death experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard about life reviews today. I forgot to mention that to you. Yeah, it's pretty common. Everybody says the same thing. They see a movie, it's a slow mo, at the same time it goes very fast.
Uh,
And the soul is just it's like relieving every moment of their life, and they can
mhm,
be in the shoes of the other person. Usually, let's say they insulted someone and they
mhm,
feel the feeling of the other person. They hurt someone, and
mhm.
they just feel the pain of the other person. That's what they call it, karma, or judgment of God.
Yeah, yeah, Sergey, that's a very good point. Near-death experiences can involve seeing some or even all of their prior life, which is absolutely amazing. I mean, think about it. They're unconscious or clinically dead, typically for minutes, and yet here they are, even if they've lived decades of earthly life, reliving, reseeing all of those prior events. The life review is variably described, but one of the more common scenarios is a screen or screens in which they see their life moving through quickly. And they, as you said, for a minority of near death experiences, they are not only seeing their interaction with other people, but they actually feel from the perspective of that other person what the interaction was like. And it's often very surprising. They may feel that they enlightened, showed some love to that person, even though they weren't aware of it. They can show that their words were hurtful and maybe more than they intended in this. So it's an extremely informative type of experience, which really helps them to live the rest of their lives. It also demonstrates the incredible acceleration of consciousness that occurs during near death experiences. And by the way, um, some of the near death experiencers, when they relive, review what happened in early childhood, memories that they had long forgotten in their earthly life, virtually every single time that they typically ask their parents, check out, did this event really occur? Yes. What they saw in their life review was a real event, even if it was long forgotten. Yet another line of evidence among many for the reality of near death experiences.
Right. So you see, these near-death experiences, they started to come out after Dr. Moody's book, Life After Life, mostly, because it became open. Everybody starts talking about it. Now we have all these podcasts, and it's getting more and more open. But it used to be like a taboo subject
Mhm.
because they can lock you up. They say, okay, you're crazy and you're a danger to society and you're a maniac, and we're just going to lock you up and put you on medication. So this is why a lot of people didn't talk about that before.
Yeah. Thank goodness, I've been in the near death experience arena for 25 years. At the very beginning, there was more problems with people that had a near death experience being misdiagnosed. But Sergey, I'm a physician, and I'm here to say if anybody anywhere on earth has a near death experience and then is considered to have some kind of psychiatric diagnosis requiring medicine or inappropriate treatment, that is medical malpractice, and they're legally liable for that. So we really don't see that anymore in the modern era. Near death experiences are quite widely known. In fact, a survey done by Pew Forum back in 2021 found that 72% of people in America believed that a near death experience was an observation of the spirit leaving the physical body. So that's amazing. I mean, the great majority of people have heard about it. They recognize that they call it a spirit, but it's really the soul, synonymous in terms of that. But anyway, that's how widely known near-death experiences and how widely accepted it is here in America. So with all that, it makes it almost impossible for somebody to misdiagnose a near-death experience. People, thank goodness, like important podcasts like what you're doing, Sergey, is really helping get the word out to everywhere, people throughout the earth, about near death experiences, what really happens with them. They're not to be feared, they're not to be misdiagnosed, but they are certainly above and beyond the information about a near death experience. They're just incredibly inspirational, consistently with many lines of evidence and many people sharing all converging lines of evidence that there is a reality of life after death.
Now, Dr. Long, in your
Mhm.
own experience interacting with so many cancer patients, did they feel any fear before they had to go, or they were at peace? What's your experience?
I mean, fear as far as having a near death experience or related to their
Fear
cancer diagnosis.
before dying, fear of dying.
Oh, yeah. It's quite variable in terms of the level of fear that people have prior to their near death experience. Sometimes when their cars are approaching each other and they know there's going to be an accident, there's naturally expected fear. They're horrified.
Yeah,
And then, boom, the car hits, they lose consciousness, and then have a near death experience. So, probably most people have some pre existing fear as to right before their near death experience, that accident, that illness, that overwhelming event that's going to render them unconscious. But there's also many near death experiencers where it happens so suddenly that there's no possibility of them being
yeah,
fearful. These may
yeah.
be people struck with lightning, accidentally shot, an accident that happened, a fall or getting hit by something that they had no prior warning. So it's all over the page in terms of the amount of fear they had prior to their near death experience. Most had some fear, chest pain, oops, I'm having a heart attack, or other people just boom, all of a sudden, unknown to them, all of a sudden, boom, they're in that unearthly realm and have no idea about what physical traumatic event got them there.
Yeah, but how about people who have cancer and the doctor told him or her, you have 3 more months to live, and they just laying in that bed and they taking the morphine, and what it goes through their head? Are they afraid, or they're just waiting for to die?
Uh, that's a real tragedy. Unfortunately, I've walked with huge numbers of people in that scenario in the 38 years I've been a radiation oncology doctor. So it's all over the board in terms of people's emotional reactions. Some people want to sort of do their bucket list of things they didn't have a chance to do if they're physically capable of it. Other people will want to spend more time, as much time as they can, with their friends, family, and loved ones. Other people do, unfortunately, have depression. Other people, I mean, it's literally it's as individual as each individual cancer patient is themselves. And fortunately, and when it comes time for them to get close to death, there's an amazing group called hospice, and hospice people can come in and do amazing things to help keep people comfortably at the very end of their life. Typically, you can be allowed to be on hospice if you have less than 6 months to live, but very commonly it's in those last days to a week or two that people start hospice. So that's another thing. Certainly, if they've had pre-existing a strong faith, the pastoral staff can really be reassuring meeting with them. Hospitals typically have a pastoral service that can meet with folks and help them if that would be of assistance. So it's really, if you have somebody, if you know somebody who's at the end of their life, you really have to listen to them. If there's anything that they want, great. If they want to be left alone, great. But it's really up to the individual that's got that very end of life scenario that really should be, leading the direction in terms of what to do or not do to them to help them most be have as meaningful and positive a remaining life as they can.
Yeah. In your own experience, did your patients feel the approach of death? Did they feel that they didn't know that tomorrow they're going to be gone, or in a day, or an hour?
Yeah, I mean, it's once again, it's all over the board. And by the way, in the modern times, doctors generally do not say you have 3 months to live. We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. And, even with a very serious end of life scenario, you can live a little while or live a long while. And it's in modern day, we consider it inappropriate to say you have 3 months to live because you're probably wrong. So you really just do your best with patients rather than focused on what you think their length of survival would be. The focus is on keeping them as alert, as pain free, relieving symptoms to the greatest extent possible, and just help them to be as symptom free as possible in their remaining lives. That's our whole, basically, entire medical complex of people, different specialties all working toward that same goal to be the best that we can for our patients near the end of life.
Well, you said that it's in modern times, doctors try not to tell the patients, but my mother, she passed away in Germany,
Hmm.
and she went for a checkup, and the doctor told her that she got exactly 3 months to live, and he was so cold and so detached. And my mother lived exactly 3 months after that. I mean, like almost to the day.
Yeah, wow.
I think and I hope if she was never told that, she had
Mm.
hope and she lived a little longer.
Mm. Do I recall what you said earlier that was about 40 years ago?
That was 40 years ago, sir. To
4 years
2020,
ago. Oh
40
yeah,
years ago. Yeah.
at least in America, doctors are very reluctant to give this. You have 3 months,
Yeah.
six
Yeah.
months to live. So
Yeah.
that's unfortunate. You ran into that. Modern contemporary thinking is that that's inappropriate. And you're right. Some people will sort of say, if I have 3 months, I darn sure I'm not going to live 3.5 months, and that's ridiculous. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you do, in honesty and integrity, need to communicate patients the severity of their disease.
Yeah.
It's much more kind and patient focused if you give them a range. You can say, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know when you're ultimately going to die, but you do have advanced disease. I've seen people, in your clinical situation may live 2 months, they may live 6 months, and it could be less than that or it could be more than that. We don't know, but at least giving them some idea that
Yeah.
it's, not 2 years. That's important information. That's a trigger to them to start getting their affairs in order because they're not going to be around terribly longer. So that I think there's a balancing act between giving them important information about likely what their life expectancy will be without giving them a very specific date and time, time range in which their death would be expected.
Yeah. Yeah. Because his mind is very powerful and they just can materialize whatever you believe in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Dr. Long, most of my guests that had that had NDE, they had positive experiences, like
Mm-hmm.
we described.
Mm-hmm.
They seen the light, they seen the tunnel, they seen a figure, they had life review, they felt love. But there is one guest I had, and he described hell.
Mm-hmm.
And I posted that on my channel, and it got a lot of views because
Mm-hmm.
it's about hell, it's different. And he described that in such a vivid detail. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you can see it's like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably going to make a movie in Hollywood. Maybe he's trying to sell the book. I don't know. He wrote a book.
Right. The frightening or even hellish near death experiences, first of all, the significant majority that are reported are not near death experiences. For example, you're in a bad car wreck, you're in the intensive care unit for several weeks recovering from severe injuries, you have a hellish experience, and right at the end of your hellish experience, you wake up in the intensive care unit. That is time stamped to being an experience in the intensive care unit. You wake up right at the end of the experience in the ICU. That is what's called ICU delirium. And so that's a fairly common scenario where people in the ICU, they're sick, their sleep deprivation often happens, and they're delirious. And so it's a basically a mental dysfunction, and that is far more common for ICU delirium to be very frightening, even hellish experiences. So first of all, most of those reported experiences are not really near death experiences. Having said that, yes, I have, maybe several percent of near death experiences do have some hellish content. It can be a little bit of hellish content, it can be a blend. There can be some hellish content, and then the experience as it progresses, they're out of that hellish realm and it transitions to a very positive, beautiful experience. So I've seen all of them. So there's no question that there are some near death experiences that are hellish, that do have hellish content. So I really don't that's one of the great final mysteries of me as a researcher, is to sort that out. I will say, at least tentatively, here's an idea. There can be other malevolent beings that they encounter during the near death experience as part of this hellish being. And I think one important perspective on that is that it shows the concept of free will. We have free will on earth, even in the afterlife, even as souls, as spiritual beings, free will exists. And there can be, mercifully, an incredibly small number of these souls that choose to go down the path of darkness, of evil, of malevolence. And in general, what we see in near death experience, if there's a hellish realm, it's segregated, it's apart from the rest of heaven. In other words, people will see, as they describe seeing a hellish realm in existence, it's sort of parts apart. Oh, it's away from the rest of heaven, it's segregated, it's sort of where these malevolent beings can be and yet not impact other souls. So when people say hell cannot possibly exist in heaven, they're correct, because it is a separate, different uh, area of, if you will, heaven. And yet that also shows that free will can exist. I mean, it is astounding to think that even in the afterlife, that souls can, through free will, bad decisions, probably a whole bunch of bad decisions like on earth, end up being, in a sense, being with others. And yet to these malevolent evil beings that are described in near-death experiences, paradoxically, being around other of these malevolent evil beings is, in a sense, their heaven. This really shows to me that even in the afterlife, souls have that ability, such free will that is so operational that they can choose even to go down that path of darkness, even when they should know better, and like virtually all other souls know better. So that's another important perspective on that. So I think that helps clarify that. Also, people that have near death experiences and that are hellish will generally come back and say, you know what? I needed an experience like that, that was that difficult, that was that frightening, to help confront aspects of their earthly life, that anger, that resentment, that dark part of their own earthly soul, and for them to confront it, learn about it, and grow from it. So even people that have walked that path of hellish near death experiences, they don't come back thinking that they personally are fated to have a permanent, irreversible hell. In fact, I would emphasize, me and all other near death experience researchers that I know of, none of us, having studied near death experiences, believe that there's a permanent, involuntary hell. I think in the afterlife, it's a product of souls making that choice.
Yeah, if God loves us so much, why would He send us to hell? And maybe
Yeah,
this is just maybe just to clean the scenes, like they say, like the Bible says, just clean the scenes and go through some torture and then go to God. And
mhm,
yeah, because in this video that I told you about, there was many comments, and there were a lot of people who shared their own hellish
mhm,
experiences they had. You know, not everybody is doing the interview or writing a book, but they write that in the comments. So there's a lot of people who experience that.
yeah. Again, to emphasize, Sergey, the substantial majority of people that have hellish experiences do not have that as a result of near death experience. They can have the illicit drugs, for example, are far more likely to produce frightening and hellish, if you will, experiences. Hallucinations can be hellish. ICU delirium can be hellish experiences. So the confounding type of experiences that have that are fearful, frightening, or even hellish, The great, great majority are not near death experiences. So, whenever, attention, all viewers, whenever you hear somebody share that, always be at the front of your mind asking yourself, was this really a near death experience? And the great majority of the time it is. And actually, that's an important thing. I mean, a lot of these people think that they've had near death experiences when they haven't. And it can be very reassuring to them. You can say, hey, go read about ICU delirium. That's what you had. It's a frightening experience, but you need to understand that to help live your life in a greater sense of peace and understanding that this was an unreal experience and it is not a threat to you in your earthly life or in your eternal life.
Now, doctor, what do you advise people how to die in peace?
Yeah. I think that one of the most important things people can do is to listen to podcasts like you're doing, Sergey. I mean, it's incredibly valuable all around the world. People listen to these podcasts, listen to people talk, read the science. I mean, I've got certainly there's many good books out there about the science of near death experience, but you want to learn about near death experiences in the way that is most meaningful and evidential to you. I'm a scientist, so I read a lot of articles, but I think many other people equally validly listen to people like people on your podcast that have had real near death experiences, and you kind of go, wow, look at the consistency here over and over. They're describing things that are about the afterlife, about near death experiences, about consciousness apart from the body. I mean, it's a basic scientific tenet, sort of guy, that what is real is consistently observed. And you're seeing that. Everybody that sees your podcast regularly is going to know that. So, informing yourself about near death experience and its reality of the afterlife and making up your own mind in your own way and in your own time can be profoundly reassuring. So I think if you approach death and you're aware deep down that there really is an afterlife, that the death is not at all going to be an end, but very much a beginning of the continued existence of your soul path, that is certainly extremely reassuring. Also, for those reaching the end of life, you really want to involve your friends, family, and loved ones, and certainly work with your healthcare team to keep as comfortable as possible as long as possible.
Okay, there is a study about near-death experiences percentage. I'm not sure, I don't want to lie here, but I think like about 7 or 8% had near-death experience. So can you imagine how many people? There's millions of people. And all
Mhm,
these millions of people, they cannot lie because they all of them, they say almost the same thing. A little bit differences, like we discussed, but basically the same thing. They feel love, they see the light,
mhm,
they have a life review if they get to that point. So it's very, very similar.
mhm,
If this was made up, then everybody would have a different story,
mhm,
you know. But like you described, there might be drugs induced.
mhm,
Also, I want to quote Paramahansa Yogananda. He had one lecture, and somebody asked him, Guruji, is there a hell? And he said, where do you think you live now?
mhm.
So, Dr. Long, if people want to find more about you, about what you're doing, about your study, maybe you have a book or lectures or seminars, would you like to share that here?
Sure. One of the best resources is our research website, NDERF, NDERF.org. That stands for the Near Death Experience Research Foundation. You'll find just about 5,000 near death experiences and actually a lot of other related experiences all through there. You can feel free to explore it. If you go to the link at the top, if you are curious, there's under accounts, there's a link to exceptional accounts, and those are the exceptional near death experiences and other types of experiences. And I'll bet if you read even 10 of those, you're going to find it so inspirational and so remarkable in terms of what's shared, it could literally change your life. My research book, the very first one I did that became a New York Times bestseller, is called Evidence of the Afterlife: The Science of Near Death Experiences, and that's available on Amazon.
And one more question. Dr. Long, what's your definition of God?
Mm. Yeah. We talked about that very briefly. God is the earthly word that near death experiencers use to describe that entity they encounter. However, as near death experiencers have pointed out, God is an earthly word, and what they encountered is far beyond any earthly word description. Any earthly word, as they sometimes say, is limiting, and God is unlimited. God is overwhelmingly loving, compassionate. They feel that God loves them for all they are, everything that they are, and through, in and out. I mean, it's a beautiful, incredible experience beyond anything that they could have known on earth. So I think God is often described as a being of light, but certainly I would have to say it's sort of getting into a concept as opposed to a concrete definition. But God in near death experiences is that overwhelming, if you will, supreme being, overwhelmingly knowledgeable, overwhelmingly lovable, loving, and certainly lovable, overwhelmingly everything that is conventionally thought about God, but just literally off the scale from anything that's knowable here in our earthly life. So it is certainly very much, I'm very happy when I read near death experience accounts about God. Certainly in the afterlife, there is that God, and that is an extremely important entity to have as part of the afterlife, and certainly one of the certainly I believe critical reasons that the afterlife is so filled with compassion, love, beauty, and wonder for all of us, because God is a critical part of that.
Okay, some of my guests say that we are gods. Some say that we are part of God. What's your take on that?
Sure. I think I'm going to have to say we're part of God, but with this understanding, I think as near-death experiencers overwhelmingly describe, at least a great majority, that there is that sort of connection, that unity. So there seems to be in that afterlife a connection or unity with God that is, part of the big picture of love, of compassion there. So here we are on earth. We're still a part of God, but we're here incredibly limited. It is very difficult, and for many of us, essentially impossible to really know about that afterlife, that peace, that unearthly love, that unearthly beauty, all that God is. We literally cannot know here in our constraints of our earthly life. So I think while we're all in some important way a part of God, and retain that connection here on earth, we can't really be aware that we can't really manifest that as well as we will be able to in the afterlife.